That house is pure evil,
he whispered, his voice raw with fear. The chilling words hung in the late-night airwaves of I-95 radio out of Bangor, Maine, silencing even the seasoned DJs, Jason Stewart and Corey Skall. They had been discussing local lore, inviting listeners to share their encounters with the unexplained, but none could have prepared them for the account that followed, the chilling tale of a secluded farmhouse steeped in shadow. The caller, Justin, recounted 2 harrowing years spent living in that very house. His voice trembled as he described the relentless dread that permeated every corner. The chilling sounds echoed through the empty halls at night, the unnerving feeling of being constantly watched. He spoke of glowing eyes that pierced the darkness, a hulking form that moved with unnatural speed, the bone-chilling certainty that he was mere prey in a terrifying hunt. The memories still haunted his dreams. Justin's experience was not unique. Years earlier, the house had been home to another family, the Martins, whose encounter with the unexplained would forever be known as the Palmyra Dogman Incident. After an accident left Eric disabled, they sought refuge in the weathered farmhouse nestled deep within dense pines. Its outward tranquility masked a lurking darkness, a malevolent presence that awaited its unsuspecting victims. A perfect place for Eric to spend some time partaking in his favorite hobby, hunting. He came from a family of hunters and had been hunting his whole life, and he had a decent collection of guns to prove it. As Eric starts bringing his gun collection into the house, Shelley says,
I don't think so. I don't want guns in the house around the kids.
Fine.
Eric muttered, his voice tinged with frustration.
But if I can't keep him locked up in the house, I'm not just leaving him sitting out in the barn.
Eric and Shelley also have a son, Sean, who lives on his own. So Sean swings by and helps Eric build a big, sturdy wooden box that is lockable to keep the guns secure in the barn. They settle in and life is good. Over the course of the next year or so, Eric and Shelley develop a habit of ending their days with a cup of coffee together out on their front porch. Just a nice, quiet way to stay connected. Before May 2006, the Martins began noticing odd occurrences around the property. Items in the barn would go missing or be inexplicably moved. A hammer Eric swore he left on the workbench would later turn up outside, or nails would disappear entirely. At night, faint scratching sounds would echo from the barn, only to cease when Eric or Shelley went to investigate. The dogs, normally bold and inquisitive, became increasingly anxious, pacing near the front door and growling at nothing visible. By May 2006, the eerie nature of the property began to escalate. One cool evening, while enjoying their coffee on the porch, Eric and Shelley noticed a faint, pulsating light in the woods beyond the field. The rhythmic glow seemed to breathe, casting an otherworldly atmosphere. Initially dismissing it as poachers, Eric's unease grew when the light vanished as they approached, leaving an unsettling silence in its wake. Eric yelled into the woods,
Hey, this is private property. No hunting allowed. You better just get out of here.
They waited to hear some kind of response, but they didn't see or hear anything. So, the two of them headed into the trees to where they thought the light had been coming from. Eric decided they should split up, hoping that one of them might be able to sneak up on whoever was out there. Eric turned his flashlight off to see if maybe he could be even stealthier about it. Eric couldn't explain it, but an unfamiliar, primal fear gripped him. Earlier that week, he had found unusual tracks near the barn. Large clawed impressions too big for any known local animal. He had dismissed them as an oddity, but now the memory clawed at him as he moved through the woods. As Eric walked, every snap of a branch under his feet echoed in the silence, and he could feel something was out there with him. Something was off to his left, the opposite side from Sean. He stopped to listen but didn't hear anything. Whatever was out there with him had vanished. When Eric and Sean rejoined, neither of them had seen or heard anything except each other. The ground all around them was covered in tall grass, and as they walked, they looked for any signs of someone having been there. But the grass was totally pristine, no footprints or any other signs that anyone had been there. So they finally gave up and headed back to the house, chalking it up as just some weird, unexplainable event. A couple of weeks later, Chelsea was in the woods taking a walk with her then-boyfriend, now husband, Nathan. The two had been seeing each other for about 6 months. Nathan had just joined the army and was getting ready to ship out for a while. So the two were trying to jam in every minute of quality time they could. They were out in the woods with the two family dogs off leash so they could get some exercise. During their walk, Chelsea and Nathan noticed the animals behaving strangely, picking up a scent and bolting into the woods. The usually well-trained dogs ignored commands to return and began pawing at a circular den-like structure. crafted from sticks and dirt. Nathan crouched to inspect the den and heard a low, menacing growl. Uneasy, they quickly retrieved the dogs and left, the ominous structure lingering in their thoughts. A few days later, on Memorial Day weekend, Eric and Shelley sat on the porch around 10:30 p.m., enjoying their nightly coffee. The misty darkness blanketed the area, and a rustling noise broke the stillness. Unable to see far into the field or trees, they strained their ears to identify the sound. Eric's gut churned as his pulse quickened, his hands clenching involuntarily. Beads of sweat formed on his forehead despite the cool night air, and he couldn't shake the feeling that something unseen was closing in on him. He grabbed Shelley's arm.
Come on, we need to go inside.
Shelley hesitated, gripping the flashlight tightly as its beam sliced through the suffocating darkness. Her breath quickened, audible in the still night, while the cold metal of the flashlight pressed against her damp palms. The beam revealed 3 sets of yellow-green eyes reflecting back at them. The creatures, crawling on all fours, were moving with an eerie, almost unnatural silence. They seemed to glide over the terrain, their movements fluid and predatory. The moment Shelley's spotlight landed on them, the creatures, each around 7 feet tall, rose to their hind legs and sprinted with astonishing speed toward the far side of a pond about 100 feet from the house. Their fur ranged from light to dark brown, with wild, unkempt patches on their heads. Their rounded muzzles and short, stumpy tails added to their nightmarish appearance. The creatures stood roughly 7 feet tall. Their short fur ranged from light brown to dark brown. The fur on their heads was longer and wild, their ears rising from the jawline to above their heads. They had broad, rounded muzzles and short, stumpy tails less than a foot long. As the creatures disappeared behind the pond, Shelley swept her flashlight across the yard. To her horror, 2 more were creeping closer, only about 20 feet away. Once exposed, these creatures also stood on their hind legs and bounded away, their movements a terrifying blend of canine agility and human-like gait. Their elongated paws, tipped with gleaming claws, left deep gouges in the soft earth. That was enough for Eric and Shelley, who turned and scrambled into the house, slamming the door shut. Shelley still had her flashlight, so she turned and started shining it out the window. She wanted to see these things again. She had to know what she was looking at. Eric pulled her back down to the floor. He didn't want to give these things any reason to come into the house. So she got up and started running around the house, closing every open window. Around this time, Shelley realized she hadn't heard the dogs in a while. Concerned, she began calling for them while closing the windows. Eventually, she found them trembling and huddled together near the laundry room, their usual confident demeanor replaced with fear. Their reaction confirmed Shelley's growing sense of danger. Something was very wrong outside. Then Shelley remembered Chelsea, who was asleep in her room upstairs. So Shelley ran up into her room and shook her awake, saying,
You gotta see this.
Like most sleeping teenagers, Chelsea groaned, rubbing her eyes and muttering,
This better be good.
as she reluctantly followed her mom to the windows in her room. Her windows overlooked the part of the yard between the pond and the house. Shelley shone her flashlight out the window, and there they were. They had moved closer to the house and were just standing on 2 legs, hanging out, staring right back at Shelley in no apparent hurry to leave. One of them let out a low, guttural growl, the sound seeming to vibrate through the very foundations of the house. Shelley pointed out the shadowy figures to Chelsea, who was like,
Yeah, a wild animal. Imagine that. Wake me up if anything else exciting happens.
and she stumbled back to bed. It was pretty obvious to Shelley that the monstrosity standing in the yard wasn't properly registering in Chelsea's foggy head. Meanwhile, Eric was downstairs by himself, totally kicking himself for not having his guns with him. Not being the provider for his family had been really tough on him. That wasn't the kind of man he was. But now, not having anything with him to protect his family was just about more than he could bear. But the guns were in the locked barn, up in the loft, inside a locked box. Not helpful. So, he racked his brain, trying to figure out what he could do to save his family. He thought maybe he could get the truck and back it up to the house so they could all run and get in and drive away. It would be the longest 25 feet of his life to get to that truck. But he had to try. So he grabbed his keys, opened the door, and started sneaking out to the truck. Just as he got there and got his keys ready, the motion sensor light on the barn turned on, scaring him and making him drop his keys. He bent over to pick them up, and when he stood back up, in the reflection of the truck window in front of him, he saw one of these creatures behind him. He turned to face it as the creature started moving closer. Eric thought,
This is it, I'm done.
but when the creature put its hand or paw on the fence to climb over, The light from the yard light shone on it, and the creature quickly backed away with a guttural snarl. Seeing the only opportunity he was likely to get, Eric limped his way back to the house as fast as he could and hurried inside, slamming the door behind him. Shelley, who had no idea Eric had even left the house, lost it.
Are you nuts? Not only did you leave us here alone, but you left the door wide open? Do you realize what could have happened? What if one of those things got inside? We'd have no way to stop them. Eric, I don't even know what you were thinking. What would we have done?
Eric said.
I'm so sorry, honey. I just feel so helpless. I had to do something.
Not having any way to get away and knowing that they were in real trouble, they decided to call the police. That went about as well as you can imagine. The 911 operator, thinking it was just a bear, told them to call the game warden. The game warden just told Shelley it was probably just a bear and to shut and lock all the doors and windows. They'd be sure to come by in the morning and make sure everything was all right.
Thank you very much.
Okay, nobody was coming. They were on their own. Shelley headed back upstairs to Chelsea's room, where she could see the whole front yard. The dim outlines of trees swayed in the breeze. Their shadows merged into the faint glow of the moonlight that bathed the field. The soft rustle of leaves carried an eerie stillness, amplifying the tension in the air as she tried to keep an eye on these things. Eric's hands trembled as he paced the room, his breath quick and shallow. He ran a hand through his hair, muttering under his breath, the weight of helplessness pressing down on him like a vice. It was his job to protect his family, and he couldn't do that. But then he remembered back to when he tried to get the truck, how the creatures seemed to retreat from the light. Maybe the light hurt them somehow. That had to be the reason they didn't get him when they had the chance. He thought,
Maybe I can go outside, trip the sensor on the bond to turn on the light. While it's on, run into the bond and get a gun.
So out the door he went again, this time frantically waving his arms as he moved as fast as he could to get to the area of the motion sensor to get the light to turn on. By the time it did, Eric found himself surrounded by these beasts. They paced restlessly, their eyes glowing ominously in the darkness. His only clear path was right back to the house, but he also knew that once he left that motion sensor area, it was only going to be a few seconds before it turned back off. And he wasn't moving very fast. He took off as fast as he could, the pain in his back screaming at him with every step, and he barely made it back to the porch before the light turned off, and the beasts started running. They were so fast that they almost caught him before he could make it in the door. Back inside, Shelley could hear the creatures rustling just outside the house. The family knew instinctively that if these things wanted to break in, they would be unstoppable. She could hear them making strange grunting, growling noises, almost as if they were talking to each other. The sounds were hard to describe, but Shelley said they almost sounded demonic. And these creatures were so big and heavy that when they walked, Eric and Shelley could feel the vibration through the ground. So they knew these things were just hanging out, waiting for them. Shelley finally woke Chelsea.
Get up. We need you awake and ready. All hands on deck.
They all huddled up in the master bedroom and waited. By about 1:30 a.m., they tried settling down to get some sleep, but that wasn't easy to come by. As daylight finally broke, the family cautiously peered out the windows, their relief tempered by the undeniable evidence in the disturbed grass and clawed tracks around the property.
We're not crazy.
Shelley whispered, though the unease lingered in the morning silence. Eric called Sean over, and the two of them circled the house looking for tracks, which they found in abundance. Tracks of a creature with huge claws walking on two legs. So what were these things that terrorized the Martin family that night?
I don't know what we saw.
Eric later admitted.
And honestly, I don't think I want to know. We've never seen anything like it before, and I pray we never do again. That place just ain't right.
But as crazy as that whole encounter was, that wasn't even the whole story. It seemed the land itself was steeped in some kind of strange energy, pulling in things that didn't belong. Eric always suspected the property had a way of drawing them in, starting with the ghostly girl he saw almost as soon as they moved in. Maybe it was the lights or whatever force powered them, a signal or a beacon fueled by electromagnetic energy. But it didn't just attract ghosts. He had heard theories about ghosts being tied to electromagnetic fields, and perhaps that same energy was calling to the dogmen as well, as if they couldn't resist whatever was humming beneath the surface. Almost as soon as they moved in, Eric began seeing something he chose not to tell Shelley about. A little girl, maybe 10 or 12 years old, with dark brown hair and braids. She wore old clothes and laced leather boots, her overall appearance ragged and her expression perpetually unhappy, even mean. Eric saw her both in the house and outside, and sometimes he could hear her faint footsteps on the stairs. The little ghost girl seemed unaware of Eric's presence, and though unsettling, he told himself it wasn't anything to worry about. He could handle her. However, one night, they were sleeping in bed with their 2 dogs at the foot of the bed, on the floor, on their cushy dog beds, when something slapped Shelley's foot. And it was a pretty good slap. Shelley sat up, turned on the light, and scooted to the end of the bed to check if the dogs were there. She was thinking maybe one of them had jumped up on the bed, and then decided to jump back down and brushed against her foot along the way. But the dogs weren't there. She looked around and found them both curled up together, fast asleep in the space between Eric's side of the bed and the wall. The Martins' unsettling experience wasn't just a one-time event. The Dogman Incident was the final straw, the terrifying climax that spurred them to leave the farmhouse behind. But as they moved on, the eerie events continued for those who followed. New residents reported similar occurrences: mysterious lights, guttural growls from the woods, unexplained shadows lurking around the property. Justin's chilling words on that late-night radio show echoed through each account.
That house is pure evil.
This is DeadNet Studios, uncovering the truths that lurk in the shadowy corners of vacation land. Do you have a story of an encounter with the unexplained, or perhaps with the Dogman itself? Share it with us at deadnetstudios@gmail.com. Until next time, folks, keep your doors locked, your lights burning bright, and remember, the shadows hold more than just memories.
In the shadows of the digital night, we wandered far and seen sunsets, from haunting tales to eerie lights. DeadNet Studios, where fear ignites.